What's shaking, everybody? Today we are welcoming Jest Sidloski to the show. He is the VP of Marketing, Customer Experience, and E-commerce at Peavy Industries. Uh, for those of you who are like, "Hey, I've heard that Peavy, but not Peavy Industries," also Peavymart, the big chain. But Jest, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on the show.
No, I'm excited to hop into a couple cool topics, particularly around diversity and inclusion and kind of how to, have that permeate throughout a company. Two, I really want to talk about the acquisition that you all made and going through a rebrand, or not going through a rebrand, but rebranding a bunch of stores to come kind of under your brand. But before we get into that, I want to hear your story. How did you find your way into marketing, into PV Industries? Give me and the listeners that background, set the table for us, and then we'll hop in.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure if it's that interesting to everybody who's going to listen to your podcast, but essentially, I grew up with Peavy Industries. That's the parent company of Peavymart stores, and I started my career with Peavy Industries in high school. Believe it or not, as a career work exploration class, I chose Peavymart. And I worked throughout my high school career at Peavy Mart, and I actually went to college originally for emergency response. So I was going to be a paramedic. That was my dream. We had a recession in 2008 in Canada, and it kind of put the paramedic dreams on hold. And at that time, retail was experiencing a crisis, if you will, especially in the province of Alberta, where we couldn't find employees. And I had an opportunity from Peavy Industries to pursue store management operations. I did that, loved it, passionate about it. Moved inside Alberta, took an opportunity and ran my own Peavy Mart store. And then it wasn't very long. I think it was probably about a year after running a store. They brought me into the corporate offices to start the first ever training and development department, and that's history now. That seems like forever ago. I've been with the organization actually, Jordan, 17 years today.
Oh
So
wow.
it's my 17th year anniversary today, which is very exciting. Um, Company provided me education opportunities, just continued to learn, continued to grow. Uh, you know, Took over this new world, 10 years ago of social media, digital media, which was new to our industry. Um, Learn more about that, and eventually it evolved to running the marketing department, which is your e-commerce, your flyer, traditional, and everything that comes with the word marketing. So that's my origin story, and have had fun every single day here.
I love it. Um, and one, congrats on the 17 years anniversary today. I feel lucky to have you on the show for that. And then two, I think this is important to set the table for the listener. PV Mart is not just your typical grocer mart. You guys serve a very specific customer. So I want you to walk through kind of like, if we just met at a party, kind of give me that elevator pitch on what PV Mart is. And I think that'll help us as we get into the later conversation about, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, definitely not your average retail, that's for sure. So PV Mart started back in the '60s. Jordan, I was recently on a Retail Council of Canada podcast, and I was going through our history. And I'm not going to do that today because, granted, I'm going to make a mistake. So '60s, the late '60s, we started in Western Canada, farm and ranch retail. So that's everything to serve the rural customer. It was your tractor implement parts, it was your tractor seats, your work clothing, your housewares. The core concept was to provide this retail experience in rural communities that didn't have their own retail, so that the farmer's family, would come into our store and buy everything they needed for rural life, garden centers, greenhouses, anything to make and grow your own foods, DIY. And then it's evolved to where we are today. So we are still very much a farm and ranch base retail chain, with modern agriculture offerings, your urban homesteading, your chickens, your bees, your do-it-yourself lifestyle, and then so much more. So that's Peavy Mart's origin story. That's a little unique in the market, I guess, and Canada's largest farm and ranch retail chain right now.
So in 2017, you all took over. the TSC brand and brought that in under Peavy Mart. And walk me through the process of rebranding those stores because it's not as simple as going in and changing a logo. Um, was there a lot of internal training, internal buy-in that had to happen? Was there, different market strategies you had to do to be like, okay, we've been around for a minute, but we have to introduce ourselves to this new to Ontario, to Manitoba. Walk me through kind of some of those challenges, or maybe some of the learnings that really stuck out throughout that time.
Yeah, so Peavy Mart primarily Western Canadian based through most of its history, and then fast forward to like you say, we acquire the TSC Stores brand in Ontario. Now TSC Stores has also been a retailer in Canada since the late '60s, with a lot of synergies to Peavy Mart. So the core concept of that retail chain was the same as Peavy Mart, but there was quite a few differences with customer bases, how we advertised, how we marketed, our origin story, if you will. And so this year, just this year, we rebranded those stores to Peavy Mart stores. So we started that work kickoff 2021. So while we acquired them several years ago, the work didn't really start till now. And COVID kind of gave us that opportunity to go, hey, it's now or never. Like, is this something we're going to do, or are we going to keep two brands? We going to merge these brands to make a national banner? And the executive group under Doug Anderson's leadership decided, let's rip the band-aid off and let's get it done. So in a matter of 3 or 4 months, we converted every single store in Ontario to a Peavy Mart store. So that's not, doing a couple stores a year is a lot of work. Doing 40 some locations in 4 to 5 months is not for the faint of heart because, like you said, you're rebranding the entire sign package, the exterior signage, the interior signage, uniforms, rewards, loyalty programs, flyer, merging websites. And we managed to do all of that in months. And I mean, that's a testament of Peavy Mart is, punching above its weight, perhaps the little company that could, the culture of the employees. But you asked the question of, you know, why I guess that was a lot of work, or what did we learn? And um, when you do anything fast, it's what did you miss? And I think you don't always catch all of that until you are called out on it. And so for us, a lot of consumers in Ontario, they love the TSC Stores brand. Well, we get that. I mean, we understand that change is really difficult. And if you grew up with a brand that has been in your whole life, you've heard the jingle on the radio, well, all of a sudden it's now changed or it's gone. Maybe you didn't know. So we got a lot of feedback from Ontario on, well, what did you guys do? We loved this brand. So um, that's to be expected, I think, from any business acquiring and changing any business name is you have to ensure that you're respecting the customers who had an association to that brand. And I'm not saying we didn't do that. I'm just saying we learned a lot about how to do that better. And then to continue to tell that story of we are Canadian. Jordan, you're in the US now, and I think any country can be proud of the fact that they want to support their own country first. And um, Ontario consumers didn't know Peavy Mart was a Canadian chain. We had, as much as we can put that in a flyer, in a store, on the website, no matter how we brand it, we really have to be transparent and authentic, and tell that story to ensure that the consumer has the buy-in. They know it's true, and we're 100% Canadian owned and operated, employee owned. But still, for whatever reason, people didn't believe that was the case, and so we're still telling that story. And I think that that's what we learned along the way. Number one, I would say, is to respect the consumer, and listen to what they have to say.
I love that, and in listening to them, was there anything from like internal, employee training to say, hey, as we transition, here's how you're going to communicate to consumers, like letting them know, like, hey, we're still the same. Everyone's, I'm keeping my job. This is the same company. Was that kind of um, man, for lack of a better term, mandated or told that, hey, you had to go do that?
Yeah, I would say it started with culture conversations. One of the things we did in 2019 was hosted an appreciative acquiree summit. Now, if you're not familiar with the appreciative inquiry, I encourage the listeners to look into what that is. But we flew um, employees, vendors, customers, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders from every level of the organization, distribution center, frontline employees from all over Canada, and we flew them to Red Deer. Now, not everybody. We took a segment of each group and brought them together for a 3 day, very intensive summit. And the summit, was to talk to the employees about what they wanted from this merger, what they wanted from the future of the company, and overwhelmingly, if not all, employees that worked for the TSC Stores brand said, we want to become Peavymart. We want to be a national unified organization. We want to tell this story. We're proud of the Peavymart story, and we want to bring that to Ontario. And so it gave our president and our COO the legs to say, okay, we're going to work towards this, but here's how we're going to do this. And it started with the employee conversations. I mean, our employees got to hear of these things internally through corporate town halls and videos much before the consumer did. So we had to bring them along for the ride because they were in the driver's seat.
Yeah, that's one of the things that some brands do a very poor job of is neglecting the people who are on the front line doing the day-to-day interactions with the customers. And if you all would have showed up one day and been like, we're taking down the signs, things might have gone a little differently. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit to a serious topic, but one that I think you all are tackling a little differently than maybe others out there. And that is the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, how the company is moving forward with that. I think it's so important to hear how you're doing it because you're serving a predominant, like rural farm and ranch, predominantly a, heteronormative white community. So now, as the world moves forward and you want to take on those initiatives, walk me through what you all are doing, because I think you're doing some really cool things with the Indigenous community. I want to hear about that because I think listeners, and this will be something listeners, if you're thinking about at your company right now, like, hey, how do we do this and actually make some impact opposed to just, changing a logo to a different color? I think this will be the part of the conversation to really, take out the notebook and listen to. So, just walk us through, how are you all approaching that? What initiatives have you done? Maybe some of the challenges, successes, and I think that'd be really valuable to hear.
Yeah, such an important topic and something I think that everyone needs to do better at. And certainly, we, I would say, are just in the learning, discovery, and starting phases of what we want this to look like for our organization. Which is why anyone listening might go, diversity and inclusion at Peavymart. Like, what are you talking about? What is this story? And that's with intent. And I'll explain why that is. I mean, we have the opportunity to be better. I think all business has the opportunity to be better. Several years ago, we wanted to start out with consultation. We wanted to have conversations. We wanted to learn, and we partnered with a group in Alberta called the Nahiawin Group, who is an Indigenous consultation company. And we said to them, I don't, my years are blurring with COVID, but it was pre-COVID, that we want to ensure that our employees have the education and training to ensure that we have the full awareness to what not only as Canadians should have, but how we serve and respect our communities. And so we started this journey with them. The journey is not complete. In fact, COVID slowed that journey down. But what we're first doing is putting that work together, doing a whole bunch of things behind the scenes because we believed it was very important to walk the walk before talking the talk. And so one thing that we didn't do is we didn't change our social media graphics, if you will. And we did. Along the way, we got called out for that. We had customers going, well, everyone else is doing this. Why haven't you done this? And we even had employees ask the same question. Hey, members of my family are from the LGBTQ2 plus community. Why haven't we hung a flag or done anything? And those are very meaningful and important conversations to have, but not ignore. PV Industries wholeheartedly supports diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, we wanted to ensure that as an organization, we had those discussions internally, we had purpose and meaning behind them, and we had some of those authentic conversations first. So we actually did. We called customers and we talked to them about it, and we said, well, what are you looking for from a company like ours in this regard? Is it just about having that profile photo changed, or if we were to do these things behind the scenes first to make sure our employees actually understood why we were doing them first, would that be a better path forward? And so I don't think I don't think we're not an expert in this. We're just in a discovery mode, but we are doing a lot of meaningful work first. And we just sponsored a powwow in Red Deer, Alberta, an international powwow. And things like that make inroads to these important communities to say that, we are here. We want to partner with you. We want to learn from you. We put up land acknowledgements in every single location of ours across Canada, but we did it quietly. And here I am telling the story, so listeners might go, "Well, you're talking about it now." Well, my intention isn't to market it. We made a
Mhm.
very conscious decision as a company that these things aren't for marketing purposes. The powwow, yeah, of course, we wanted to get people to go to the powwow. We wanted to talk about it, but things like the land acknowledgements, we had an Indigenous elder come in, had a very private ceremony with some of our executive team, and we proudly hung that on our walls here at corporate office. But every single store across Canada has an acknowledgement in their location as well. Um, that's how we make inroads. That's how we, start to build the conversation around diversity and inclusion. And then when we work with these Indigenous consulting companies, we then will eventually offer our employees comprehensive education, awareness, and training, so that as a company we can walk the walk and talk the talk. So that's a little bit about what we're doing. We've got a long way to go. Like you said, we're primarily from those rural farm and ranch communities. So it's also about telling that story and saying that, these things are okay to do. And I think in our industry, we haven't seen that type of marketing or advertising connection to these communities. And I think, we started changing that last year. We started putting um, more people of diverse backgrounds in our publications on the front cover of our catalogs. And again, it's doing it with intention to slowly build up to this, so that everyone knows that we're a retailer that accepts everybody. There's no customer that shouldn't feel comfortable in our doors, and that's a really important story to tell.
Yeah, it's so massive, and I think the big thing that you've said that I'll take away, and I think listeners will take away too, is coming at the issue with the mindset of we're not perfect, we're here to learn, we're not but we also want to take meaningful action. We don't just want to take the quick action and change, like we talked change the logo, but then really there's no change within the organization that's you know there's no meaningful change, right? Some organizations, they just it's they put it up and they're not committed to the behind the scenes work, the education around the actual issues that took place, going and consulting with uh the communities in which you serve and that you want to um work with and educate about. So I think it's so important to take that mindset of like, hey, all right, we're gonna learn, but then we're gonna take steps too. We're gonna take some steps. We're gonna do some things. We're gonna consult with groups, and taking that humble but empathetic approach, I think, is the is a great place, to for all of us to start. So I love hearing that. Now, just before I let you go, let people know where one can they connect with you online. Two, where can they learn more about Peavymart?
Yeah, well, I mean, how do we find anybody these days? And I think social media is the number one tool to do so. If you're curious about the PV Industries brand, the PV Mart brand under the PV Industries brand, follow on LinkedIn. The company does some really important work, and they update most of that on LinkedIn. We're a growing company, so we've also got a lot of job opportunities and opening. That's a shameless plug for our friends in store operations and in HR. Great organization to work for. And personally, again, you can find me on any of the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And I love having these discussions and love meeting people. So that would be fantastic.
Amazing. And I'll put links to both of those in the show notes page so y'all can go and connect with Jest and also check out what Peavy Industries, Peavymart is up to. Jest, thanks again so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate it.
Jordan, that was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody. That's it for this episode. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Shelton, and I'll catch you next time.